All right, my name is Kyle Houchins. I am a Techno trainer for McNeil, and we are overcoming all of our difficulties this morning to get rolling. This is getting started. It was supposed to be Rhino for Windows, but my Windows machine died, so this is going to be, we'll say it's a Rhino 8 webinar, a platform agnostic Rhino 8 webinar. And one of the nice things about Rhino 8 is the UI has unified quite a bit between the Mac and the PC. So if you're here for the PC video, don't go running for the door, because everything that I'm going to show is 100% transferable to the PC side. So a while ago, I did a video on a VR headset, and my original intent with that, if I'm being honest, was I was going to do the controllers, and I chickened out at the last minute, and I did the headset instead because it was easier. And it's always bugged me because I kind of pride myself on sticking myself in the firing line for these webinars and doing the hard thing. And so I did some more looking at it, and it's been sitting on my desk taunting me since I did that headset video. And I decided, you know what, let's do it. And maybe this is a sign from the universe that I'm stepping too far into the fan here, but with all the technical issues that I've had last night, and this morning. But the more I looked at this, the more I thought this is actually kind of a really cool little SubD part. And what I want to do is talk about this and how we're going to do this thing. And so what I think the best way to proceed through this, and if you haven't been to my webinars before, welcome. And they're a little different than typical webinars that you may have seen, because basically what I do is I do a sketch either the day of or the night before, and then I put it away. I don't look at it. I don't rehearse it. None of this is canned. Everything that you're seeing is live, and nothing is pre-programmed. We don't do any Julia Child stuff where I mix up some ingredients and then pull something magical out of the oven. If it breaks, you're going to see me break it. If I fall flat on my face, you're going to see me fall flat on my face, and then we're going to talk about how that happened, why that happened, and then we'll make a plan on the fly to try and figure out how to get out of it. And my goal with these, and I don't know why I do this to myself, but I came up with this idea a long time ago, essentially, that I wanted to put myself in the same position that you are in when somebody walks into your office and hands you a sketch, or a client emails you a sketch and says, I need you to build this, and you've never seen it before and you have no idea how to do it, but yet the clock is ticking, there's money on the line, you've been hired to do something, and go from there. So that's the concept behind this stuff. And so what we're going to do is what I'm landing on by looking at this is essentially we're going to do this. The main body of this thing is going to be SubD. The details are going to be NURBS, and then hopefully we're 15 minutes late already, but hopefully in about an hour and a half, we'll have something that we can actually either throw through a printer or throw to a render. Now, this image is awful for building on because it's not oriented in any XYZ space. It's kind of a worst case scenario. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually not even going to use this as something to build over. I'm going to just use this as a reference, assuming that, in our kind of fictional design brief here, that I'm the designer on this thing. I did a doodle to have a conversation with myself about basically kind of what I wanted this thing to look at. And then I'm going to actually do the actual design in 3D. I'm going to make the decisions in 3D. We're going to use the 3D as the guide, and not the sketch so much as, typically speaking, when you would trace something. And I like this as a process because it is very much more using Rhino as a design tool and less of using Rhino as a, CAD monkey tool. We don't want to, essentially
Muted.
be, just basically kind of CAD robots where we sit down and just copy stuff that other people gives us. We want to be able to use Rhino as an art supply. We want to be able to use Rhino as a design tool. So enough talking. let's get into it. And basically kind of what I've decided is that this circle is about 3 inches. This circle is a little more than 3 inches, and the handle is actually about 3 inches long. So what I've decided is kind of this top disc is about 3 inches. This guard is about 3-ish inches, maybe a little bigger, and the handle is about 3 inches long. And the proportions on that in real life maybe don't line up exactly with the sketch. So if I don't nail the sketch exactly, don't come for me in the comments. There's a method to my madness. So let's start and just do a circle, and we're going to do the diameter is going to be 3 inches. And this is going to give us a starting point, except for the fact that if we start with just a circle, what's going to happen is when I go to extrude this thing, it's going to be an extrusion or a poly surface and not a SubD, and that's not what I want. So the very first thing that we have to do is we actually have to rebuild this, and we have to change this to be SubD friendly. And when we're doing circles, the minimum point count to do a SubD circle is 8. So keep that in mind. If you can do 6, you can do 4, but the circle is not going to be very circly. And so 8 is kind of where you want to be. I'm going to delete the input. I'm going to make this SubD friendly, and I'm going to rebuild it. Now you can see that when I extrude this thing, if I come down here and pick it, it's going to say an open SubD added to the selection. And that's kind of what we wanted. And I'm going to just scale my drawing down a little bit to match my space here so that I can kind of keep an eye on it, but I don't want it to be kind of in the way. And so to analyze what we're doing, and because I don't know what I'm doing, right? I don't know how I'm going to build this. I don't know how I'm going to approach it. I'm just kind of starting and hoping for the best. And so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave that circle there. And what I might do is actually start this from a sphere. And so let's come up here and go to sphere, and I want this to be a quad ball style, not a triangle or a UV. And I'm going to drop one of those at 0. I'm going to hold down shift. The diameter is going to be 3, and I'm going to place that somewhere in there. Now, for some reason, my circle is much smaller than my object, so I'm going to just double check myself and see what I did differently here. And let's do vertex and point and near and mid and center. And let's just measure this thing. So as expected, that was wrong. So let's do this with 0. And we want this to be a diameter, and the diameter is going to be 3. That feels better. So let's lock that down, and we've got now a quad ball with nice topology that we can work with. Now, we just get rid of the top of it. So I'm going to shift control drag, and I'm going to just delete all that stuff. And you can see my shape changes a little bit, but that's kind of okay, because we're going to do a lot of messing with this later. And there's a slight kind of a flange on the top of this thing before it goes into this little disc. And so what I might do is I might start with that, and I'm going to just extrude straight up, and then I'm going to crease this edge. I'm going to just use the crease tool here, and we're going to crease all. And then I'm going to grab this, and I can shift drag on any scale handle, and I can kind of get my little flange. And then I'm going to start dragging a handle. I'm going to hold down shift, and then I'm going to hold down command, and that's going to extrude a face. Little finger jujitsu going down there. So shift, drag, command. You can see that that's going to extrude a face. And then I think I'm going to crease this one as well. So let's just do that. We're going to crease all. And that gives us kind of the basis of our thing. And we can come kind of up like this. And I'm going to crease this edge. And maybe we'll deal with this later. Maybe we'll leave it. Maybe we won't. I don't know. We'll see. And then we're going to start dragging, hold down shift, hold down command, and I'm going to come in like probably twice. So I'm going to let go. Now I'm going to start dragging, hold down shift, hold down command, and I'm going to drag this in, but I'm not going to close it. And the reason I'm not going to close that is because I'm going to crease this edge. And the reason I'm not going to close that is I am actually going to replace this face up here with a NURBS object, and this kind of gives me enough for what I need to do. Now, the next thing that I want to do is I kind of want to get the ring before I start getting too crazy, because the complication lies in the connection of the ring kind of in this area. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to click a face, shift command click a face, and then I'm going to shift command double click a face, and then I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to let go. Now I'm going to shift command click. Let's do it again. Shift command click, shift command double click, shift command click, shift command double click, and that gives me this as a selection. Now, notice how few tools I'm actually using. Most of this is all just gumball, right? And so now I'm going to start dragging, but I'm going to hold down, I'm going to tap the option key instead, and you can see that little green plus shows up. If I tap it, right, it toggles. And when I let go, I'm going to get another ring. And so I can copy those and kind of break those off, and then I'm going to just extrude this down, and I'm going to crease this edge. And I'm creasing edges just to kind of give myself some constraints, right? Just so I kind of know where I'm going and what I'm doing and all that kind of stuff. I may change those later. And so let's double click this edge, shift control, double click this edge. Let's scale those both to 0, which is going to align them. And then we can decide, like, you know, how much of that we get. And then I'm going to pull the ring off of that thing like that. And we can again decide, like, you know, do we want to crease that? What do we want to do? But in the meantime, what I'm going to do is leave it, and then we're going to rotate this. I'm going to double click the center of gumball to relocate it, and I'm going to snap it here, and then I'm just going to rotate this up a little bit like that. Now, this is where the fun begins, because I have to figure out how to connect this to this. Now, the cool thing is because we copied this, maybe this needs to go up higher like that. Because we copied this, we know a couple of things. One, this topology matches this topology, and that's super important with SubD, because trying to get topology to match up from part to part is where everything gets hard, okay? Now, I also know that in order for this edge to join to something down here, I have to have a hole, right? And so in this case, I've got two faces right here that I can mess with. I can either attach it to this edge, or I can attach it to that edge, or I guess I could do this one and this one, but that would make for a really thin part. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this and this, and then I'm going to delete this and this. Shift control click, and then simply just delete it. And you'll see that the model kind of breaks on you a little bit, but that's okay. Because now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do some sewing. I'm going to shift control click a point. I'm going to shift control click another point, and then I'm going to use my stitch hotkey, and I'm going to stitch those 2 points together. And then I'm going to do the same thing here. Shift control click, stitch. And you can see that those are starting to come together. Pick a point, stitch, and we've got that joined together. And it's ugly as all get out, which is fine, because we're going to do the same thing on the inside, and it's going to clean up a little bit. So again, we're going to shift control click a point, stitch, and we're just going to go around and connect all this stuff up here to here. Now, because our topology matches, this is an easy job, because everything lines up and everything makes sense and all that kind of stuff, right? And we've created an open toilet bowl. The next thing that we need to do is we need to figure out how we're going to close all of this stuff up and reconnect it. Now, what do we have here? We got to do some counting. We've got a face here and a face here. We've got a gap with 2 edges, but we've got 3 edges here. So that means that we need to take this edge and this edge, and I'm clicking the start and the end and then double clicking the center to fill it in. And we're going to bridge, but we're going to bridge using 2 segments so that we get, and I am going to crease that just so I can keep track of everything, so we can get that center edge, right? This edge and this edge now match, which means all we have to do to connect this up is stitch those and stitch these. And voila, we've got everything connected. This looks a little weird down here, so let's see if we can figure out what's going on. I'm going to shift drag select that, and it looks like only one SubD vertex is down there. And I think what's happening is we're seeing creases. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually uncrease this, and that problem goes away. So we've just done the hardest part of the model right here, and we've got all sorts of options that we can now mess with. And I'm going to actually remove this crease as well. I like creases because it gives me very defined areas where I can say this goes no further, right? This stays put right here, and you know, I know I'm going to deal with this later. And for what it's worth, if we go to rendered view, right, and I look at this, I don't particularly like creases because they're really, really sharp. They don't capture any light on the edge. And generally speaking, that's not what we want. Generally speaking, there's no such thing as a fully sharp edge in the world. And so what we tend to do is to try and have very, very small fillets. And I'm going to rotate this face up just a little bit so that it sits just a tiny bit proud, which is kind of what I wanted. So now we have to decide, like, what are we going to do with these edges in order to get them either tighter or sharper? Because if we come on here and I just remove creases from everything, this thing gets kind of soft. And that's fine. If we go to box mode, we can take a look at it. And we can see that this is really well organized. This kind of all makes sense, right? It's kind of the correct proportions instead of this piece being too big and this piece being too short. Kind of feeling okay about that. We can look at this and say everything seems to be pretty much in order. Maybe this edge or this point and this point want to come down just a little bit, because we can see that that's kind of making a little bit of a messy transition in there. So depending on if you've seen any of my videos in the past or not, you'll hear me talk a lot about modeling in box mode. This is box mode with the tab key, versus modeling in smooth mode, which is here. And I always want to model in box mode and then refine in smooth mode, because the box mode doesn't lie. So like if I look at this edge right here and this edge right here, and I look at it in relation to the rest of the model, see how this kind of dips and changes? I might want that to be dead flat. So if I come in here and I scale this thing to 0, that's going to dead flat that, right? And then maybe I want it flat, but I want it to angle just a little bit. That allows me to be able to do that and know that that edge is going to be pretty planar. I'm going to do the same thing here, but I'm going to do it just from here to here. I'm going to flatten that as well. That scale to 0 is really, really useful in SubD because it allows you to kind of reset things and make it so that things that may have gotten a little squirrely on you, you can kind of bring them back to order. I'm going to do the same thing here. And then I'm going to just rotate that a little bit. One thing to notice, the farther I get away from the gumball, I'm holding down while I move my cursor away, I get finer control. So I can actually slow down the action of that gumball. And now when I tab, I can look at this and say, okay, that's kind of what I wanted, but now we need to add some sharpness back. So I'm going to go back to box mode, and I'm going to pick some edges to start working with. And I'm going to say, maybe this edge up here, I need to add a bevel on that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add one segment on either side of that, which gives me my, someone please tell me that they've seen this video, rule of 3. 1, 2, 3, that gives me my 3 edges, which controls my transition. I'm going to do the same thing on this edge. I'm going to bevel that. And when I go to box mode, you'll notice that this edge has sharpened up quite a bit. If I go to rendered mode, you can see that we have an almost crease, but it's much more controllable and much more defined. And we might want to do that around this edge as well. Maybe we want to bevel that edge as well. Maybe this edge actually is the one that we want to bevel, like that. Let's see what happens if we bevel that. That defines that quite a bit more. This one, I think I'm going to go full crease on that one because I actually do want to keep that a full crease because I want to be able to throw a NURBS surface in that at the end. I'm going to just take this out. Is there any reason why I need to do that? No. But I think I want to. I think I want to replace that with a NURBS surface. Now, so we're pretty much have created kind of a lovely little toilet bowl here, and I'm gonna maybe flatten this out just a hair, and we can talk about whether this ring needs to be bigger, smaller, fatter, skinnier, whatever. If we need it to be fatter, we can just shift drag scale the inside a little bit, or we can shift drag scale the outside a little bit to make that a little thicker or whatever. And if we need it to be taller, we can grab this. And here is a fun trick. When you're working with stuff that is oblique to your XYZ, just double click the rotate handle and snap it to an iso curve, and then you can move up or down depending on more or less normal to that surface. And it looks like that's adding a little detail, which I may or may not want. So I do think I want that a little thicker, but I don't want that detail there. So in order to get rid of that detail, I got to get rid of some edges. So I'm going to just get rid of this edge, delete, and I'm going to get rid of this edge, delete, and that will get rid of that. We've got some beautiful transitions going on there in a form that when I originally looked at it, it gave me a little bit of stomach upset because I didn't know how I was going to pull this off. And I think I'm going to just move this back a little bit, give that a little bit more room. And we ended up with a fairly easy to understand but nicely complex part, right? So let's make the handle. And my initial thought is we can just drag the handle right out of these two faces. We might want to add these as well. And so let's try it that way first. And we're just going to extrude, extrude. And again, rule of 3 says in order to make a transition, I need 3 edges. And I've got them there. So that gives me everything I need to do for that. But I don't like kind of the sharpness around this. So maybe what I want to do is maybe I need to do a little bit of editing on this and figure out whether I can get that to be a little less sharp. Let's figure out how long it is first. So I'm going to just come in here and I'm just going to draw a curve that's 3 units long. And so I know that this thing needs to be about this long because we decided that that was, 3 inches was about our handle length. So I'm going to kind of aim for that. And SubD, you know, is kind of ishy, but that's okay. We're gonna use that. And now I want to bend the handle down a little bit, so I'm going to grab this stuff out here like that, and I'm going to set my gumball, double click to relocate. I'm going to set my gumball kind of right in there, and then I'm going to just rotate like this, and that's going to give me that relationship, maybe a little more like that. Now, I broke my rule. I've been modeling in smooth mode and not in box mode. And so the first thing we have to do is look at the box mode and see what we did. And we made a mess. This is why you model in box mode. So what I need to do is I need to grab this edge right here, and I need to try and get this thing, you know, pulled into shape. So I'm going to actually just scale this edge to flatten it out a little bit. And then I'm going to rotate this edge, and then I'm going to pull this edge around a little bit until this transition unties itself. And I can decide, like, do I want this to be, you know, more circular, less circular, more uppy downy, less uppy downy, all that kind of stuff. And I can go back to smooth mode and evaluate it and see what I think. But the biggest thing that I think is I need to get rid of the sharpness on this handle, and so to do that I'm going to try getting rid of some edges, and I'm going to just get rid of these two, because that now changes my 1, 2, 3 to these, which makes for a much softer edge, right? And I might even take a look and see what this looks like. And I'm ending up with n-gons, and that's actually fine. I can end up with n-gons. That's not a big deal in Rhino SubD. It used to be a big deal in T-splines. If you don't know, I used to be the demo guy for T-splines, but n-gons used to be a big deal in T-splines. They are not a big deal in Rhino. You can use n-gons all day long and be just fine. So let's pull some shape out of this thing, and let's bring this in a little bit. And then let's bring this out a little bit. And then the aspect of this tends to be a little, actually a little flatter, kind of like that, and a little taller. And so to get the tall out of that, I'm going to double click and I'm going to snap my gumball to just vaguely align with that. And then I'm going to use this handle like that. And I don't like this shape down here, so I'm going to drag this point, get it a little rounder, and then maybe shorten this whole thing a little bit. You see how we just we get to kind of play with it, right? And the thing that you're going to hear me say a million times when you're working on SubD is keep your models light. I see models all the time where somebody keeps trying to add detail, add detail, add detail, add detail, and they make an unbelievable mess out of it. And the reason that we don't do that, and if you haven't seen the Rule of 3 video, I'm going to beat on this for a second. When you draw a curve in NURBS, you don't make a corner like this. And if you do, stop it. You make a corner like this. Anchor point. 1, 2, 3. Anchor point. This is your corner, and if it needs to get sharper, you move these together. If it needs to get farther apart, if it needs to get softer, you just move these farther apart. This is exactly the way SubD works. If I bring up a SubD part here, and I draw a cube, and we ignore this bottom face, and I'm going to hide this for the time being, and we ignore this, oops, we ignore these faces, you're going to notice something really interesting. Check this out. What do you notice? right? 1, 2, 3, anchor. Anchor, 1, 2, 3. If we want the SubD edge to get sharper, we move these 2 points or these 2 edges together. Okay, now the fun part about SubD is I can just move this point and make just that corner sharper, right? And leave these alone, right? It all bases, that's how the transitions work. But the goal is to keep this stuff super light. And 90% of the time, when I see a problem with a SubD model, or the customer sends a SubD model or something like that, and it's because they've got too much stuff. These models should be very simple and very easy to understand when you go into box mode, and they should all be super organized. If you're seeing in your box mode, if you're sighting down a line and your isoparams are super uppy downy, if points are crossed, if things are spiking off into space, if anything like that's going on, you probably did your modeling in smooth mode instead of box mode. Now, the other cool thing about these controllers is they're actually a left and a right hand. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just slide this over and make this the right hand version. And I'm going to futz this transition just a little bit to make this more directional. Now look at the highlights that we're getting on this thing. The surfacing quality on this is really, really good. Right? The highlights are tracking on this beautifully, and generally speaking, this is actually kind of a lovely part. Now, one of the last things that we need to discuss before we start jumping into NURBS and doing some detailing, and we're doing good. We're not even a half hour in from when I was blabbing earlier, is this little kind of scooped out part for the front, and I'm gonna try to do it with what I have already. And I might be able to just get that like this. And then I might be able to put a soft crease on this guy. And the soft creases are a new thing in 8. And if I come up here and grab the crease tool, and I pick in the center, and I say, maybe we make this 80% creased in the middle and let it go to 0 on the edges, you can see that I end up with that kind of shape that I was looking for. And the shape is a little bit asymmetrical because the idea is you're supposed to hold this thing in your hand. Your middle finger gets this trigger right here, and your index finger gets that trigger. So we need to bias this thing a little bit towards, assuming that this is the right-handed controller, we need to bias this a little bit towards the right hand. So let's take this and let's pull that in a little bit. And then let's pull this one out a little bit. Maybe like that. And you can see that we get the space that we need to make that button. Now, how are we going to make the button? Well, we'll do it the same way we did the ring. We're going to take these 3 faces, Shift Control click these faces, drag, tap Option, they're going to crack off, and we're going to end up with a shape that fits very nicely into that space. Now, we can maybe scale this a little bit so that it kind of fits into there. And then let's grab these edges and let's extrude 1, 2. And the reason that we did 2 is that gives us our 3 edges, right? 1, 2, 3, which allows us to have a transition. Now we can just go and make it long. And then I can take this and I'm going to isolate. I'm going to take this edge and I'm going to just flatten it to make my life easy. Scale that to 0, and I'm going to drag it in a little bit. And this will be nice because when I go to NURBS, I can just cap that, and then I can get a closed part. And so now I'm going to take this and I'm going to tuck this in here a little bit, like that. And then because this face needs to be biased a little bit, let's grab all of this stuff. It needs to be biased a little bit in this direction. So let's do that. And that pokes in a little bit, so let's pull that out. We tucked into this edge a little bit, so I'm going to grab this entire edge and I'm going to just pull it back and untie that. Let's see. Modeling in boss smooth mode. Let's take a look and see what I did. So, see, box mode never lies. This is the edge that I want. I'm going to pull this one back and untie that. And I may even need to rotate this edge. This entire edge might need to come in a little bit. So I'm just shift control double clicking these edges. And I'm going to shift drag that just in a little bit. And that gives us our 3. This is our transition. 1, 2, 3. So if it's too soft, this guy needs to slide. So let's take a look and see. That actually looks all right. So let's show everything. That feels kind of buttony. And then this button down here, the one for the side, I'm going to do that in NURBS. And so I think for what we need to do at this point, can I do my tool selection a little slower? It's really hard to follow on the screen. Yes, I will absolutely do that. So the next step actually, and here we are just over a half hour in and we've got like 90% of our model done, is to take this and I'm going to convert this to NURBS using the to NURBS command. And I do not want to delete the input objects. I'm going to keep those because let's say I get down the road in my NURBS object and I print it and I get it in my hand and it feels absolutely awful. I want to be able to go back and edit it pretty easily. And so if I keep the SubD, then I can make those edits really easily and then just make this edits to the SubD part, convert it back to NURBS, and then steal all the parts from my original NURBS model and stick them back on this one. And I'm pretty much back in business without having to do a ton of stuff. So I'm going to just convert this. And then I'm going to sell polysurf. And then I'm going to just slide this over so I can see the difference here. Now, we've got a lot of ISO params on here. And you would initially think, well, you just told me to keep everything light. And I did for SubD. That's really important. For the NURBS stuff, because we're doing trimming and booleans and stuff like that now at this point, this is just a regular polysurface. This works just fine. So I can take like this piece and I can cap that. And if it's not exactly planar, let's grab that and try a planar surface. And then join it. And that joined into a closed polysurface. So now this is just a regular Rhino object. I can boolean it, I can shell it, I can trim it, I can do whatever I want. Well, maybe not shell, because shell is kind of ishy. Let's rename a layer here. Let's do this, and we'll call this SubD. And let's take this guy, and let's assign him here. Change object layer, and then I'm just going to hide that. That way we don't have to keep seeing it pop back up. But if we look in rendered view, you can see that this is pretty much what we were going for, right? So let's deal with the disk, and we could argue about whether I needed to do this in SubD or whether I needed to do this in NURBS. But if I grab this entire edge, it should allow me to put a planar surface in here, and it does. So now I can join this and join, and that should be a closed polysurface, which I think I saw that as an indication. And then I can do things like I can go ahead and put a mechanical fillet on this if I want. And I use blends because I like blends. They look prettier than mechanical fillets. And what I'm going to do is just drag a shape in here, and then we'll preview it, see what it looks like. And I think that's going to work just fine. So we're going to say done. And you can see that now we have a NURBS object booleaned into another NURBS object, but the NURBS object was generated from the SubD. And this gives us a really clean platform to kind of work from. So let's put the button on next, because that's the kind of another fun part. So let's take this, and we're just going to draw a curve. And I'm going to start, and I'm going to just kind of randomly figure out where this button is going to go. And this will be something that we would have to do some testing on. And, you know, ideally, I would probably want to make this dead symmetrical, but I'm going to just wing it and brave the comments. Close that up. And we're going to just project this right onto the model. And because the surfaces that come out of SubD are really, really high fidelity, right? These are very clean connections. We can do stuff like this where I can just split this object with this curve. I can end up with this as an object, and then we can just extrude it and make the button. And I'm going to just shrink this just a hair so that there's some clearance in there. And then I'm going to hide this. And then I'm going to select this edge, and I'm going to do the exact same thing in the opposite direction. I'm just going to extrude this in. And then I'm going to select this entire edge, and I'm going to scale it flat. And then I'm going to pull this in a little farther. And then I'm going to join and cap. And that'll close that off. And when I bring this back, I've got this thing that I can then just tuck inside here, kind of buttony like. I can apply a fillet or a blend or whatever I want to do to the edge of this thing, because this is just a nice clean NURBS object now. And my preview is way too big, so I'm going to set all, and I'm going to do like 0.15. And that's still too big, so let's drag the size in like that. And that's a little better. That gives us a nice little reveal on the edge of that, so we'll say OK. And we've got an open poly surface now, so we need to figure out where it's open. So let's look at our show edges. And it looks like there is an edge right on the edge of our fillet there, kind of misbehaved. So let's fix that. So let's grab this little chunk right here and delete it. And I'm not entirely sure why that happened, but I tend not to worry too much about why it happened and just focus on the how I can fix it. And it looks like it just, the trim in here just misbehaved. So I'm going to do a blend surface from here to here, or a blend curve, sorry. And I'm going to set that to tangency. And then I'm just going to pull this curve till it does more of kind of what I wanted it to do in the first place. And I want to make sure that I get it, right? I want to make sure that I trim that all out. And then we're going to go to an orthogonal view, and we're just going to trim this off. And I may need to adjust this a little bit. Maybe do this in wireframe. So let's pull this, just this surface out, and I'm gonna kill history at this point because I don't want history to mess me up. And I'm gonna extract by right-clicking on explode and extract just that surface, and then trim. And that didn't quite get me there, so let's do this. Let's take this curve. We might even want to untrim that surface because it's very, very close. So let's do that. Let's pull this surface out. Let's untrim this using the untrim. And we're going to keep the trim objects because we may need to go back. So we're going to trim that. And then we're going to just trim this again using, looks like this curve needs to maybe explode. Get rid of that. This curve and this curve can join. And then let's, in an orthogonal view, we'll just trim that. And we'll bring our model back and see what we did. And it looks like that's going to work. So let's join this back up. We'll see. We might be going down a rabbit hole here. And let's look at our naked edges just to see if we made anything worse. And in this case, we did not. So let's just repair this little section in here. And we're going to just do that with a 2-rail sweep. I'm going to chain these edges. There's a video on our YouTube page, by the way, called File Repair for Watertight Parts, which you might want to take a peek at if you run into this kind of stuff often. It's super useful to kind of have that knowledge. Now we're back to closed poly surface. So this is a good part. We can print this and all that kind of stuff. So let's do our detailing. And this is where we can have some fun with this. So let's go to the top view. And I am going to turn on Auto C-Plane, which is a new feature in Rhino 8. And I'm going to Shift-Control-Click this face. And what that's going to do is that's actually going to stick the C-Plane right to that face. And the cool thing about that is now everything I draw is going to be on that face itself. At least it should be. And what that allows me to do, and it looks like I missed, so let's do that again. Let's make sure Auto C-Plane is sticky. And we want, there we go. Now when I draw on this, it's on the face. So I can interactively kind of figure out where my buttons and stuff are going to go. So maybe I'll put one kind of here. I'm going to tap Alt, make a copy. So those are like my AB buttons. This is like another copy over here, and maybe that's a slightly different shape. And then my gimbal is going to be kind of, I don't know, somewhere over there. And we'll say that we've done some design research to figure out how to do that. Now, we can use push-pull, which is another Rhino 8 feature, because these curves lie on this surface. And this is one of the reasons that I like to replace this surface with a NURBS object, because I knew I was going to be doing this later, is I can actually pick that surface, invert it, and then just pull those buttons out of the surface. Now, I might want to do some stuff with these, and that's fine because this is a great starting point. So like, say for instance, if I wanted to do like some bezeling or something, I'm going to Shift-Control-Click, Shift-Drag to make this in a little bit, and I'm actually going to drop this in instead of out, and you see that it's created a little bezel. Now I can drag this straight up. I can drag this up again, and then I can shift drag to actually put a little fillet or a little chamfer on that button. 0 modeling tools, that's all in the gumball. So let's do that again. Shift-Control-Click, and I'm going to drop this under just a hair. I'm going to shift drag on the scale handle. Then I'm going to extrude this back up, and I want it to be the same height as this one, so I'm gonna drag it kind of right in there, and then I'm gonna drag this up a little bit and then shift drag to scale that in. Now if I want this edge and this edge to be the same height, all I do is scale them to 0, and that's gonna align them. Same thing with this. If I want this face and this face, scale those to 0, and those are going to align. And that stuff is all lined up now. So that's our buttons for there. So let's do the same thing over with this guy. So let's grab this. Let's go down. Let's shift drag in. Let's extrude up. Let's extrude up one more time, and then shift drag scale. And maybe this guy is a little more chamfery, or maybe a little lower. Or if that's a round button, I can just delete this and then put a blend surface in here. And then set that to tangency. Take a look at it. Say OK. Join that up. And then this little gimbal thing over here, you know, that maybe is a little bit different thing altogether. So maybe we take this and we just make this a little chamfer in there. And then maybe what I want to do is steal this, go straight up, tap Alt, and then maybe I want to do this the opposite direction. Maybe I want to start going this way to make an object that's like this. Again, all gumball. No modeling tools in here at all. And I've got a little gimbal. Maybe I want a detail on this. That's my little detail. Now, gimbals are usually ball shaped, so let's put a ball on the end of this, and I'm going to snap this to the center because it's easy. And we'll do something like that, and then just gumball this straight down, and then kind of poke it in there like that, and then we can Boolean this and that together. And that's our little gimbal. And if it's too tall, which it looks like it's way too tall, let's just Shift Control drag all this, and we're just going to drop it down. So let's add a few more details to this. Let's go to the top view, and we'll use the text tool, and we're going to do an A and a B, and those are going to be solids, and their thickness is going to be like, I don't know, 3, random, I don't know. Let's do bold and say apply, and those are going to be massive, but that's okay. So let's take this and we'll just stick it here, Shift Control drag. If you go back and watch this video, and you watch it at your own pace, which I highly encourage you to do, notice how few modeling tools this entire video is used. This entire video, this entire model is almost entirely gumball. I'm going to just center this up a little bit. Like that. This guy. Gumball is definitely a Rhino 8 superhero when it comes to SubD, or anything else for that matter. And once you understand all of its party tricks, there is actually a video called Gumball Party Tricks. you will be amazed at kind of what it's fully capable of doing. And it looks like we need to rotate this just a hair. Like that. And I'm going to just have that be a tiny bit proud. Now, can you do all of this with more precision measurements and all that kind of stuff? Yes, you absolutely can. There's absolutely nothing stopping you from doing that. Can you do it in an hour live while suffering through massive computer meltdowns, all that kind of stuff? Maybe. So for the person who's queuing up the commands to say, this is not very precise. Yes, I know. All right, so let's take a look and see where we are. And in not even an hour, we're under an hour from when I actually started blabbing, we have our controller pretty much in a position where we could start doing some stuff. So I'm going to just delete this because we don't need it anymore. And let's figure out how to make this a little bit more interesting looking. So I'm going to pop open my side panel down here using this little hidey hide thing. And we're going to start making some materials. I'm going to make a white plastic. I'm going to make a black plastic. And I'm going to make a black rubber. And this one, all I'm going to do here is I'm going to kick the value down to like 95, just because the default plastic is really bright and it tends to kind of overblow when you try and render it. This one, we're just going to do black. Let's add a speckle texture to it, and let's make that, we'll make it extra small and see what that looks like. And I'm going to shift control click and then right click assign and do a sub object selection. It looks like the extra small is not going to be small enough, so let's do extra small. That maybe needs to be even extra smaller, but let's see, maybe we don't like the speckle. Maybe we'll try the grit. And if you don't like this, which I don't, and it doesn't give you enough control, all you have to do is change this from a plastic to a physically based, and it's going to open up all the detailing in here where I can come in and I can actually crank the size of this down even smaller. Within the plastic itself, it's just really, it's kind of limited to what you can get, but if you convert it to a physically based, you can actually come in here and then really mess with it. And then if we come back in here, I can crank the roughness up a little bit so it's not quite so shiny. And that looks much better to my eye. So let's do a rubber. And in this case, we can probably get away with just doing black, bumping the clarity down quite a bit, and then assigning it, and it should read differently. The reflectivity, if I crank around with that, you can see that like it starts to get kind of dead. You actually want your reflectivity high, and clarity is what controls the shininess. And rubber tends to be fairly reflective but have very diffuse highlights on it. And I don't like the edge of this button, so let's knock that off. So let's get this whole edge and let's drag this down pretty small. I think we need to get pretty small in order to get around that. And so we've run into a situation here where my inside fillet is too small to be able to fillet it. So we get to do one of my favorite tricks called the pipe trim trick, which I learned from James Carruthers years ago. I always give him credit for that. And what I'm going to do is select an edge and duplicate it. I'm going to join that curve, and then I'm going to make a pipe out of it. And what I'm going to do is use the pipe command down here, and I'm going to make a pipe about the size of the fillet that I want, and I'm going to just let it fly and deal with the consequences. And you can see exactly what's going on here, where this thing actually came around the corner, actually did a good job. Sometimes it bow ties in the corners and you actually have to go into the surface and untie the points, but in this case it actually looks like it did a pretty good job. So let's go to wireframe, pick this, trim, and what we're going to do is use that pipe to trim a gap. And what we did was we made a very nice, very even gap between those two parts, which we can then use blend surface, chain the edges, chain the edges, auto chain. All right, let's try this again. Chain edges, auto chain. Get that guy. Get this guy. And then we can create, looks like one edge didn't like itself. Let's try that again. Chain edges. That one went okay. This one went all the way around to here for some reason. Looks like there's a little dink in that, which I don't love. But let's see if we can make it go. There we go. Looks like I just missed picking an edge somewhere in there. We may need to add some edges in here, add some shapes, and so I'll just add a few in here to help it find its way around the corners. And this allows you to be able to blend or fillet things that didn't want to blend or fillet, because essentially now we're using a different tool to make that transition. And instead of a ball fillet, which failed in those corners, this is now closed, we end up with a blend, which then actually kind of works fine. I'm going to just delete that curve. So let's add a few more bits in here. So these guys, we're just going to go ahead and leave those as white. These guys, we can do sub-object assignment. So I'm going to shift command click all of this stuff and then right click assign. And that is a different material. All right. This is cool because you don't have to blow the model apart to do a rendering. A lot of times when in the past, when you had to do a rendering, if you needed to print something and you needed to render something, those had to be two different models. And now it can be the same model because this is still your closed polysurface. It's just you're doing sub-object assignments of materials instead of having to have them actually be separate parts or be on a separate layer or anything like that. So the last thing that we want to do is, and I think, you know, for just under an hour, I think we're doing pretty well here, is to let's go to our render tab. And if you don't have a render tab, you can right click on any of them and bring up your rendering tab. And I'm going to change this from being a solid color to a gradient because white on white is kind of tough. And I'm going to change the top color to black and the bottom color, maybe we'll lighten that up just a hair like that. And then we can decide, like, is the plastic on that too shiny? Like maybe we need to bump the clarity down on it just a hair. Make sure I'm on the right material. Interesting. Oh, screwed up all my sub-object assignments. That's okay. So let's get our clarity dialed in first here. For some reason the clarity doesn't seem to be changing much. There it goes. No? Plastic is misbehaving for some reason. Interesting. All right. I'm going to go backwards a little bit and get our stuff. See if I can get our assignments back. All right, fine. We'll do it the fast way here. I'm going to shift control drag all of these guys. Right click assign to rubber. Shift control click this. Right click assign to our speckle. Grab these guys, assign to our plastic. Nope, there we go. I think I picked no on that last time when I should have picked, or I picked yes on that last time when I should have picked no. All right, so that gives us that. And then the only thing that we may want to play with a little bit is maybe the environment. There's a better environment. So let's load up our environment. And I like the Automotive Studio one that lives in here. It's this Rhino 8 Automotive Studio. Let's just see what that looks like. And we can just assign that to all channels. And I don't know, I kind of like that better. I'm confused as to why my reflectivity is not behaving here, though. That feels buggy to me. I'll have to mess with that later. Let's make a new one, just out of curiosity. And then let's select these objects, and then let's assign that. Not bad for my first day, huh? All right. Now does this behave? There it goes. Something was just wrong with that first material for some reason, but that's much softer. All right, and then the last thing that I wanted to do is to and this, we need to crank the value on this one down a little bit because it's just overblowing a little bit. And the last thing I want to do is the cut lines on this are kind of important. So I think what I'm going to do is first save. Not today, Satan. I'm going to save that. And then I'm going to draw some cut lines in here, basically kind of how I want them to lay on this part. And I want to kind of do some interesting cut lines on this thing, maybe like that. And then I'm going to start here, and let's go. This is a neat feature that not a lot of people actually know about in Rhino, and I'm going to play with this shape a little bit. It's a little computationally expensive, and the reason that I saved is occasionally it wets the bed and crashes the model. Hopefully that's not the case. My computer luck is not super great today, so I may be asking for it, but what I'm going to do is modify this curve a little bit because I don't want it to go all the way through the part. So I'm going to get rid of that piece, and I'm going to get rid of this piece as well, because I want it to just kind of end right there. And so what we can do is draw on our cut lines. And let's see, that's as far as I want that to go. Perfect. And then what I can do is I can either leave them as a curve, right, and just do my renderings or whatever. But let's take the hard road. That seems to be my path today. And if I pick this part and I go to properties, up here there's a shutlining tool, and I can click on that. And I can turn this on, and then I can add some curves. And I'm going to add this curve, and I'm going to add that curve, and we're going to say, okay, done. And it's going to think for a while, and the radius is quite big as a default, so you're going to see that it actually is pretty honky massive. So I'm going to take this and do 0.015. And it's going to think for a second, and then it's going to update that. And you can see that it ends up with a really nice kind of rendered shut line. Let's fix the other one. And we'll update that. And that looks not bad. And I can take and hide these curves now, and then the geometry itself remains. Now, this is a render trick. This is not real geometry. If you need this to be real geometry, what you need to do is run a command called extract render mesh. When you extract render mesh, it's actually going to create a real mesh from this fake mesh that is just display. And that'll give you something that you can actually print. So fun trick, like let's say that this had a pebble texture on the bottom of it and you actually wanted to print that texture. You can displace that in the render view, take a look at it, get it the way you want, extract the render mesh. It's going to bake that displacement into the part, and then you can print it and actually get that. So if you wanted this pebble texture to print, as long as this was done in the displacement channel and not the bump channel, you could end up with something that would actually be printable. All right, so I'm feeling good about this so far. Let's adjust the contrast on our background just a hair. I think I want to go back to my gradient, and I think I liked a little lighter, but not as light as the other one was, and we'll go with that. Maybe our reflection on the plastic needs to be just a tad higher, something like that. Maybe our clarity needs to come up just a bit. And then I think we are in a position where we could save again. And then we could punch out a render. Now, because I'm on a Mac and I'm on an older M1, this rendering is not going to be super fast. But I'll throw it in ray trace mode, and we can have a little QR or a QA if there's any questions on that while we run this. So it's probably going to take, it's actually not running bad. That looks pretty good, actually. So you can see that like hour and 9 minutes, we've got something that is renderable. We've also got something that this entire part is watertight because I made all the pieces watertight. You could take this, run the mesh command, get a mesh and throw this through a printer. And, you know, if you've got a bamboo or something like that, a couple hours, you could have something to hold in your hand. And so that is a good half day of work that you can bill a full day for. Don't tell your clients how easy this is. Stuff like this used to be so maddeningly impossible. And now it's almost embarrassingly easy to the point where, you know, you need to manage the expectations on your clients so that, you know, they're not saying they need one of these every 4 hours, you know, otherwise you're going to burn out. So use this knowledge to your benefit, and share how easy it is carefully, and use it for your benefit. So any questions? Go ahead and type them in the chat if you do. If not, I will let you go. And I appreciate you bearing with me for the original technical issues here. And think we ended up with a pretty decent result. So if you have any questions, hit the chat. If not, thank you much. My name is Kyle Houchins. I'm a tech and a trainer for McNeil. This is Getting Started Rhino for should have been Windows, but actually was Mac, but actually works for Mac or Windows. Go make great stuff. Thanks. Bye.